Years ago, I was working with this youth group, and it was so fulfilling for me. It was prior to my getting married, and I just thought I was going to be on that fast track of continuing what I was already doing, was preaching and having the healing gift and prophecy. So I was at one of our services, and I had this full-blown vision, and I was just telling everybody, and I'll never forget it, like, we are represented as a child that's holding onto Jesus around the waist, and we're on like a seashore, and it's like very rough waters, and they're crashing on the sand. And as Jesus takes a step, each one of us is completely following in tandem behind his footprints, like walking just as he stepped. And it's like we're holding on for dear life. Anyway, I'll never forget it. So I shared it, and then it obviously ruffled some feathers. So I went to the, I don't know, there was some kind of meeting that we had, and the pastor, the youth pastor, was like, "You are not the prophet of this church." And I'm like, "I never said I was." And he's like, "Look, we've given you the troubled kids. I get it. We don't have space and room for you, so you're out in the hallway, and you've done a great job really ministering to these teenagers. They've come full circle." And I'm like, "Well, it's not me. It's like what we're doing in this established atmosphere is to get them pumped up for Jesus and to live for something other than street life, drugs, and stuff like that." And he was like, "Again, we need you to go on sabbatical." And I'm like, "I'm sorry?" And he's like, "We need you to just focus on your new marriage," because that had happened, "and just take 6 months and you do what you should do as a wife to learn your role in your new home." And I was like, "You just don't want me to work with the kids. Like, that's what this is. It's influence on them that you cannot control." And I get it, and I'll abide by the orders, but I'm not going to worry about losing contact with them, because I'll be back in 6 months. I'll see you then. Well, there was no intention of that. And my husband and I at the time, we ran a triathlon camp, which was in the backyard of this mega church, because we used their parking lot. It was huge. And this was about 2 months into my exodus, and I see the youth pastor walking out, and he can't look at me, he's looking down, and I'm thinking, "Oh no, what did I do now? I'm getting in some kind of trouble." And he literally said, "I need a leader to go to El Salvador, and we'll pay for you if you'd be willing to go." And I'm like, "Yeah, sign me up. I don't even have to ask any questions." It's like, are you kidding me? I've been whisked away from doing the thing that made my heart beat. It's like now I have the opportunity to go on a foreign land with all these kids that I love and have sown into. I'm like, heck yeah, sign me up. This was just the beginning. When we went and we were on this foreign soil, the interesting thing about it was we were held up by a delayed plane flight. So we all had to meet before we were going to set sail, and we had 2 days. And I said to him, this could be a really great time to have a foot washing, because it's such a humbling experience. I've done it one time in my life, but I really feel like the Lord is saying that. And again, I was reminded I am not the prophet of the church, and I was like, okay, dang. So we're all posted up, chilling and hanging, and it would have been ample opportunity to do so, but we didn't. Nonetheless, I've shared stories about El Salvador, how miraculous it was. We saw miracle after miracle after miracle after miracle. Oh, and in fact, I'll share this one really quick. So as it turns out, it was 10 days in, and I was getting in trouble for praying for miracles. And I was exhausted, and I actually didn't have anything in me left to pray, because leadership on my team was like, silence, just don't speak, which, I was like, fine, I'm going to comply. So we're sitting there, and they have an altar call, and there's 250 people that have gone forward, and the Lord's like, "I want you to pray." And I'm like, "Well, I don't feel like praying." And the Lord's like, "What do you want?" And I'm like, "You know what I want? I want all of them to just drop like flies." And everybody in the room fell to the ground, one fell swoop. And I have the youth pastor standing over in a corner holding somebody up, and he's like, "You did this." And I'm like, Holy Spirit, I did not expect you to do this. I mean, this was literally as it left my lips, and I prayed this thing, and I commanded everybody to drop like flies. I just didn't know at that moment that I had been obedient the whole time. I didn't stumble and I didn't cower to man. I was being honoring, because that was the position of the pastors on this trip. At that point, they had said, you can't speak. So in not being able to speak among them, I spoke to the Lord, and he heard me and he answered my request. As frivolous as it was, he still knows my personality, and I needed that as proof for me to say, okay, I know that I'm at least here, and we witnessed all these things, and we're not going to be able to contain it when we go back on American soil. Which we arrived back home, and I was reprimanded again and told that I cannot speak of all of the miracles that we saw. And I was like, okay, but you're not going to silence these kids, because they had witnessed so many miracle signs and wonders throughout our time period there. And lo and behold, wouldn't you know, the other pastor's daughter had a dream that we should have had a foot washing before we went on our trip. Everybody gathered at the church. I wasn't there. I had no idea that this was even going on. I get a call from one of the other leaders, and he's like, where are you? And I'm like, where are you? He's like, well, the other pastor's daughter had a vision that we should have had a foot washing before we left on our trip. You should be here. And I'm like, I didn't know about it. And he's like, well, aren't you upset they're doing this like without you here, and it's almost like in spite of you? And I'm like, but God's the one that's getting what he wants. God's doing it. And maybe it needs to happen in my absence, because technically I'm back on sabbatical. But it's okay, because God's moving in these kids' lives. And that can't be stolen, because they're witnessing each other hear from him. And that's all that matters. It's an extension of what we lived together in El Salvador. And I was there. And I brought a lot of it with me. And I get to relish in the fact that God still called me to partake in it. So be encouraged. Other people might not like you around, but if God says you're supposed to be there, just obey him.